Summary of Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. Freire talks about how pedagogy of the oppressed came to be in the introduction. He says that it is based on his time as a teacher in Brazil and on what he saw while he was staying away from politics. As Freire worked to make his students more critical, or conscientizado, he noticed that many of them have a fear of freedom. This fear, he says, is not really a fear of freedom, but a fear of the risks that come with freedom. Freire also knows that his ideas might be seen as too idealistic or reactionary by some, and he knows that the book was written for radicals. He directly compares radicalism, which is a desire for big social change and human freedom, to sectarianism, which is a set of beliefs that lies about the world and tries to stop it from changing. Freire says that his model for teaching can only work if the people who take part have become radicalized. Freire thinks about how his work is incomplete and says that the reader can look at it critically and find parts of his case that he himself missed. This is why Freire says we need a pedagogy of the oppressed in Chapter 1. It's how we confirm our identities as humans that he calls humankind's central problem in the beginning. This affirmation is something that everyone wants, but it is constantly broken by systems of injustice that take advantage of and hurt oppressed people. Freire says that people who are oppressed can regain their humanity in the fight for freedom, but only if those who are repressed lead the fight. It brings up the main issue of the book, which is how to make an education system with and for repressed people that will help them become freer. Freire then talks about how injustice changes the minds of both those who oppress and those who are oppressed. People who oppress others see freedom as a danger and treat people like things to be owned. People who are oppressed feel alone and start to think their oppressors are good. Freire says that the fight for freedom must have two parts. First, people must think about what injustice is and then they must take action to change it. Leaders in this fight should talk to people who are being mistreated instead of becoming oppressors themselves. Freire's ideas about schooling are explained in Chapter 2. He breaks the usual divide between teachers and students, where teachers know more and have more power than the students. A teacher deposits facts into the minds of the students, who then have to remember them. This is called the banking model of education. Freire says this model is flawed because it teaches students how to live in a world that is unfair instead of teaching them how to think critically about the world. People who are enslaved and teachers should both reject the banking model in the fight for freedom. Freire suggests a problem-posing model that makes teachers and students more equal in its place. Problem-posing education forces students to think about how and why problems happen by giving them real-life examples of problems. Freire says that this model directly fights oppression by giving people the power to question their situations and by supporting conversation. Freire starts Chapter 3 by talking about dialogue in more detail. He says that in a society with levels of authority, dialogue is an act of love, humility, and faith in people. People who are talking to each other need to have hope, trust each other, and be able to think critically. Like the larger fight for freedom, dialogue is made up of both ideas and deeds, called praxis in Freire's language. He criticizes people who only think or only act. After that, he talks about the connection between people and the world, saying that teachers should think about how their students understand history and reality. He makes a distinction between animals, which only live in the present and don't know about the past, and people, who know that they have changed the world and can shape its future. People's ideas and values at a certain point in time shape that point in history. Freire calls the ways that those ideas show up in the real-world themes. Learning about these themes in the classroom can help students understand the world better and help teachers understand how their students see things. Freire suggests that one way to do this is for teachers to use both audio and video tools to show and talk about a situation with their students and find out how they feel about it. Here in Chapter 4, Freire talks about her ideas on cultural action, or the ways that people change cultures. He describes two types of cultural action: dialogical action and anti-dialogical action. Oppressors use anti-dialogical action to keep their power and keep people from working together. Leftist political leaders, on the other hand, can use dialogical action to bring people together in the fight for freedom. As Freire explains, anti-dialogical action can be done in a number of ways, including through conquering, divide and rule, manipulation, and cultural invasion. As an example, he shows how these are different from the dialogical action of extreme political leaders, which includes working together, being organized, and combining different cultures. Freire also spends a lot of the chapter talking about extreme political leaders and what they need to be like in order to really help people who are being abused. These leaders should know what stops oppressed people from fighting and avoid the tactics oppressors employ to control them.
About the author. Freire was born in 1921 and grew up in the northeast of Brazil. He often saw the poverty that ran through Latin America during the Great Depression. After learning law, he started working as a Portuguese teacher in middle and high schools. He married Elza Oliveira in 1944. She was a primary school teacher who pushed him to develop his ideas about education. They had 5 children together. Freire spent a lot of time in the 1950s and 1960s teaching poor people in Brazil how to read and write, often with help from the Brazilian government. This work has a big impact on his writing. These programs changed their methods a lot, and they were able to get more people in Brazil to read and write. A coup d'etat got rid of Brazil's president in 1964, and Freire's projects were seen as too subversive by the new military government that took over. Freire was jailed for more than 2 months for being a criminal and then sent away soon after. He worked in Chile for 5 years after a short stay in Bolivia. It was there that he wrote Education as the Practice of Freedom, 1967, and Pedagogy of the Oppressed, 1968. Both books got good reviews from academics. Freire taught at Harvard and worked as an expert for the UN for a lot of the late 1960s and early 1970s. Freire joined the Workers' Party in 1980 after a decade in exile. He died in 1997.
Hope we summarized it fully and you liked it. Please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so that we are motivated to create more videos.